The internet is full of creepy stories, but some of the scariest ones come straight from the people who experience them. Today, we're diving into the depths of Reddit to bring you some of the most chilling, unexplainable, and downright terrifying stories we could find.
So sit back, listen closely, and try not to get too paranoid. This is the Paranoia Pair, episode 2 of Paranoia Files. Okay.
This is from the subreddit Paranormal called For a Decade, I Was a Paranormal Tour Guide at a Infamous Location. Allegheny, the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum,
Oh, I've
formerly
heard
known
of this.
as Weston State Hospital, is a Kirkbride building that housed the mentally ill from 1864 to 1994. Is that the one that's in, like, New Jersey?
I can't tell you that much. I just know the name.
Oh, okay. 'Cause
I
I've
think
never heard of this, I don't think.
I think Ryan and Shane did an episode there.
Mm. Oh, is that the one there was, like, a famous one where, like, the guy, like, supposedly still, like, lived there in, like, the tunnels? No? Okay. In 2007, it was privately purchased and became a museum/historic location and ghost hunting spot. It has a most unpleasant and dark history that I've regaled to thousands of people, and it pains me to be an expert on the subject. In 2021, I retired from my position as a guide and ghost hunt event manager under severe burnout. After all that I experienced there, it solidified in my mind that paranormal things that defy rational explanation do indeed happen, and certain phenomenon are absolutely real. Electronic voice phenomenon especially. It's almost October and I'm feeling a little spooky, so here are a couple of strange things that I experienced in my time there. One evening while training for the job, I was on the first floor with a couple coworkers while everyone was on a tour upstairs. We were just kind of killing time, quietly observing the area. Light from the outside was coming in through the windows, casting on the inner hall's wall. In that light, I watched the perfect silhouette of a man from head to hip walking through that light from left to right. I said something about it, and the three of us watched as an arm and a hand moved into the light from the right side. I immediately ran into the room and began looking out that window for someone outside. There was no one there. At the time, the realization that from the ground to the bottom of the window is like 7 feet. It didn't occur to me at the time. I will never forget the crisp, clear silhouette shape for as long as I live. We would run experiments with a spirit box, which rapidly scans radio frequencies and are believed to be a communication device. One person would use one with noise canceling earbuds. All they're able to hear is the radio static and the blips from a few random stations. When they hear a word or phrase, they are to say it out loud. I always liked this role in the experiment. One evening, my coworker and I ran one of these experiments in a notorious room where a murder in 1987 took place. For 10 minutes, I sat and listened to nothing but radio static through the spirit box. No blips of radio, nothing except of the static. I was starting to get bored when I heard a woman's voice say evil, so I spoke up and repeated the word evil. Next thing I know, my coworker is shining her flashlight in my face to get my attention. I pulled the earbud out and she was practically frantic, saying, "It's time to go. Time to go." So we haul ass out of the room, down the hall, down the next hall to the center section before she would even tell me what happened. While I was hearing nothing but static, she said she kept hearing what sounded like someone shuffling their feet and walking around just outside of the door. She said she spoke up and asked whoever is out in the hallway, are they nice? That was when I spoke out and said evil.
Mm-mm.
I would quit my job. In the wee hours one night, we figured it would be cool to see what would happen if we shut all the doors of the ward. One of the doors, as I was closing it, the knob twisted in my hand. I was not twisting the knobs, and it was forcibly pulled closed. I stood there for several moments, opening and closing that door, trying to replicate what happened, trying to explain it. Finally, the person with me was like, "What the hell are you doing?" It was so weird. I'd never felt the invisible force like that before. We had 3 people spend the night one night, and they had thermal imaging video. They set it up pointing down the hall where we could all watch on a tablet. We thought it would be interesting to leave a device at the far end of the hall that would alarm if the field around it was disturbed. As one of the dudes walked down the hall to put it there, we could see his form on the thermal imaging, clearly human shaped in colors representing heat and warmth. When he walked by one of those doorways about a fourth of the way down the ward, the shape of a head, neck, and shoulders and upper body of a person in colors indicating cooler temperatures lean peeked out as he walked by, like someone popped out of the room for a second as he walked to check it out. I've never seen anything like it, won't forget it, and would give my left testicle if I had one for a copy of that footage. That happened a lot. A guest capturing something far out and not sending a copy. That would suck.
I hate the peekaboo ones. That would I don't know what would be scary, a peekaboo, like one peekabooing around a doorway or one just like standing
Mhm.
there like not
Just
moving.
creepily watching
Yeah.
you.
Oh,
I'll end this long-winded Reddit post with something that completely changed me and that I still don't understand. June 3rd and June 4th of 2017 at 3:40 a.m. June 3rd, after an hour or so of hearing a female's voice, one instance even sounded like she had said my name, as well as banging around footsteps, literally running sounds on the hardwood floor towards us. I sat quietly on the floor with the group. I started to feel dizzy, lightheaded, and gross. I told myself it was my imagination and that I'd be fine. A few moments later, I started to feel this intense burning sensation on my lower back, just to the right of my spine. Again, I told myself it was all just my imagination. The burning sensation kept amping up, getting worse and worse. I told myself that I didn't want to be that guy and say something in front of all these people. Finally, it got to the point to where I had to say something. I asked my coworker with us if there was anything there, and she said, "Oh my god." There on my lower back, just to the right of my spine, was a mark that looked like a burn or an abrasion about 3 to 4 inches long and about 1 inch wide. Now, I'd seen other such claims made by visitors of scratch marks and the like, often writing them off, and the marks were always gone within an hour at most. I had visible markings on my back for almost a week. My nerves there, to this very day, often feel weird, sometimes chilled, sometimes like a skin soreness, especially when I think on the experience. And she actually attached a picture. Or
I was
they.
gonna ask if there was a picture.
June 4th, the same part of the building, same time of night, I noticed that my voice recorder ran out of memory, so I'm holding it in my right hand, using the flashlight in my left so I could see what I was doing. Suddenly, I feel a burning sensation on the underside of my right forearm. Did a what the fuck and shifted my flashlight to it. The person beside me watched as 3 welts began to appear down my arm. Needless to say, that shit blew my mind. It's one thing to see the marks like that, it's a whole ass other to watch it as it happens on your own skin. Like the majority of instances I've heard about, those marks were gone within 10 to 15 minutes, no lasting effects. Scared would be the wrong word, but I have none to describe my mind frame around those events. I took a week from work after it to try and process it all and was nervous being in that hallway for the rest of the summer. Like I said, I still don't know what to think or believe. Since my resignation, my mental health and overall happiness has greatly improved. I used to tell people for a while afterwards that it felt like I'd gotten out of a toxic relationship with that place.
I think after the first experience I would have been done for.
Yeah.
I'm not messing around with that.
I say that I would quit my job, but there I was playing with demons and ghosts at sleepovers.
I would have taken the first experience and I would have quit. Like I mean, maybe if people were with me, I don't know.
I feel like if it was me and you though, we'd probably be fine.
We'll have to try it out sometime and go to a haunted place
Yeah.
because I'm a wuss. And it would be kind of funny for both of us being wusses.
Mhm.
I don't know. My dream is to one day ghost hunt with you. In a perfect world, that's what we would do. And it would be the most embarrassing content because, well, it'd also be useless
It'd be
because
so fun though. It doesn't matter as long as we're having fun.
the one I'm going to start with also comes from the subreddit Paranormal. It's titled Got Lost in the Woods for 8 hours as a Little Girl and Saw Something Unexplainable. It's saying it's a real experience, so I'll start it now. I grew up in a densely forested rural area in central Virginia, and like most kids my age, 10 at the time of this story, I spent a lot of time playing in and around the woods. My best friend and I had found a creek one day while exploring different deer trails through the woods. This creek we happened upon was a very rare find and the perfect spot for us to play. It was wide and deep enough to swim around in and had a nice, soft, mossy bank on either side to rest on after we tired ourselves out. The water was cool and clear, no copperheads and no mosquitoes because the water was constantly running. We were psyched. After a few hours of swimming, we had to walk back home for lunch, but made plans to pack lunch the next day so we could have a picnic on the creek banks and spend the whole day there. The next morning, we set out for the woods around 1 p.m., planning to have the picnic first and swim after. We entered at the same spot we had the previous day and followed what we thought was the same deer trail. It was not. At the point where we should have found the creek, we walked into a small clearing that was covered in huge, thick ferns. We had definitely never walked past this before. So, being both hungry and tired of walking, we decided to eat in the clearing. We laughed and played around there for a while, spitting watermelon seeds at each other from our lunch. It was an absolute blast, and we were both in wonderfully giddy moods. That all changed, however, as soon as we packed up and set back out to find the creek. As we walked on, the woods started to feel darker and colder. We got skittish, and I noticed my friend kept whipping her head around to look behind us. After about a half hour of walking, we came up on what looked like an entire overgrown bathroom sink, toilet, and bathtub, all sitting arranged together and covered in ivy. It's pretty common to find weird shit like this in the middle of the woods, so we just walked on and made jokes to lighten the mood, calling it Bigfoot's bathroom. After another hour of walking and not seeing anything we recognized, we started to panic. Instead of trying to reach the creek, we were now just trying to find our way back home or out of the woods at least. I told her we should follow the sun and eventually we would come up on a road or someone's property where we could find help. She insisted on another way and we began yelling at each other out of fear and, let's be honest, little girl bossiness. I told her if she thought she was so right, she could go her way and we would see who got out first. So we split up. Now, as an adult, I fully acknowledge I was being a stubborn brat and also an idiot. Worst possible thing we could have done. That 10 minutes after splitting up, I began to hear someone walking maybe 100 feet behind me. Thinking it was my friend deciding to go my way after all, I slow down so she can catch up to me. Instead, whatever it was matched my pace. I slow down, it slows down. I stop, it stops. This went on for hours. The whole time I was going back and forth on whether or not it was in my head or if it was really something there following me. I picked up a big stick, swung it around a few times to make sure it was sturdy if I had to hit someone with it, and trucked on. As it began to get dark, I came up on something that made my heart sink into my stomach. It was Bigfoot's bathroom. I had just walked in a huge circle for hours, despite being 100% sure I was following the sun setting west the entire time. Confused and frustrated, I sat down on a log and just screamed my little heart out while smacking on my whoop ass stick. Repeat while smacking my whoop ass stick repeatedly into the ground. As I tried to collect myself, I heard the footsteps again walking up on me from behind. I called out my friend's name as loud as I could. No answer. Then, after a short pause, the steps began to run towards me. I jumped up and booked it as fast as I could in the opposite direction. Now, this is the truly horrifying part, which I typically omit while telling people this story. As I was sprinting through the darkening woods, I began to hear what I thought were church bells. I looked up to see the darkest, deepest cloud I've ever seen in my life. In the middle, it was so black and it was like looking into the night sky, and the dark gray around it seemed to be swirling. It gave me a horrible feeling to look at, almost like the nausea you get when looking through binoculars for too long. What sickened me further is that I realized the sound of bells was coming through the hole in the cloud. They were deafeningly loud, I mean, really booming out of this thing. When I realized this, I stopped dead in my tracks. I felt a sense of absolute and overwhelming dread that has gone unmatched in all of my 24 years on this planet. Something in my head began screaming that if I did not run away from whatever the hell was in that cloud, no one would ever see me again. I would be gone. I did not want to run towards the thing chasing me either, so I made a sharp right and took off away from both. It was now completely dark and I was running blind through the woods, smacking through branches, wheezing and tripping every few feet for what seems like another hour, until I smacked into something low and flew over it. Hitting the ground so hard, all of the air in my lungs was knocked out of me. As I lay there trying to recover, I realized I couldn't hear the bells anymore. Then my eyelids adjusted more to the dark and I realized what had made me go ass over teeth was an old fence. Grabbing hold of it, I prayed it would lead me to a farm, and sure enough, it did. I walked up over a hill about a mile to the back of the old farmhouse and explained what had happened, and the farmer graciously gave me a ride back home. I was covered head to toe in scrapes, oozing blood, and more exhausted than I'd ever been in my life, but I was finally safe. It was past 9 p.m. when I finally got through my front door. My friend had gotten back shortly after we split and figured I had as well, so hadn't told anybody I was lost, and my family figured out I was just still out after dark, which wasn't uncommon for me. They were shocked when I walked in all beat up and crying. Nobody had been looking for me at all. To this day, I wonder how long they would have waited to come find me if I hadn't been lucky enough to find that fence and if it would have been too late.
I would have been so grounded.
I know the real terror is like, how often are you out past 9 when you're 10 years old? Like, my my mom would have like grounded me and well, that was probably it. 'Cause- but like also, I'm a wuss. Like, I wouldn't have been out at past 9 in the woods
Yeah.
as a child. My God, if my kid was out there, I would have already called the police, sent you out there.
And the fact that your friend just didn't tell anybody,
I know. You'd think
I
after,
would be calling you.
yeah, you would think, like, even if you're like, oh, they probably made it home, like, you would at least call them and be like, ha, I made it home.
Mhm.
Not like, I'd be rubbing it in your face if I thought I made it home
Plus,
first.
we're such chronic worriers.
I,
Like,
I would, what if something got you?
I don't feel like we would have separated.
No, because I'm pretty obedient. So like if you told me it was this way, I would have just trusted you. And if you
Yeah.
got us lost further, then I'd just be like silently mad at you. Like you
I
could,
probably would have made a joke about it. That's my go-to.
yeah, we would have been goners for sure. But yeah, I don't think we would have separated.
And imagine being, like, just some old person and some kid comes,
Yeah,
like,
at
at your
night,
door.
bleeding, and
Yeah.
I'd want to talk to their parents. But like what gets me is the thought of the person running. I have like an immense fear of like, okay, it's not like an immense fear. It's like the thought of you not knowing like what's behind you and then like hearing the running footsteps. Like I think
Mhm.
I would just like as a cartoon, like when their little spirit just like woo out of their body, like that's what would happen to me.
I have this story of, so my parents got divorced, okay? And it was my dad's weekend, and we went over to his house, and he took us hunting. My sister was asleep in the car, and he didn't wanna wake her up. She's like, I wanna say 7, and he left her in the car.
Nothing says good parenting like leaving your
I
child
know.
alone in a car.
Yeah, in the woods. So we go, like, looking for, like, squirrels or whatever the heck we were hunting, and, um, my sister wakes up, and she is screaming because she wakes up alone in a car in the middle of the woods. Of course, she's going to freak out. She's a kindergartner. And so we're, like, booking it, like, through the woods and, like, jumping over, like, branches and crap, and oh my gosh. I
Imagine
thought she was, like, getting abducted.
being murdered.
Yeah.
Imagine like being like somebody else in the woods minding your business
There
and
was other
hearing
people in the woods too.
yeah, and like hearing a little girl just screaming at the top of their lungs, like
Mhm.
that
And
would be
then yeah,
terrifying.
and then our dad, like, yelling out her name, like, that's not terrifying at all. I don't know if my mom knows that story. "Hey, mom, that happened.
Don't send us to
Sorry."
dad's house anymore.
Oh, it's
Even though I'm like 28 and I don't even talk to him.
yeah.
At the woods, by my dad's old house, I'd always walk around it when I was a kid and didn't have anxiety apparently. And I remember finding a trail that had like bones like hung up on trees and everything. And then like a bridge that went over the creek and like a few of the boards were missing.
Mhm.
And it was super I thought I was like onto something. Um I now look back at it and I'm like, okay, it was obviously the person whose property I was on cuz in our little town we don't have scary stuff like that, but
Yeah.
like it was pretty cool looking back on it cuz like it was super spooky like just like deer heads, like skulls hung up on trees and go back and stuff like that. But then the most scary part was seeing a great blue heron taking off and I thought it was an actual pterodactyl, and I ran home to my dad. Not the wood, not like the bones hung up and, like, hanging out of trees,
No.
but the giant pterodactyl that took flight. I ran home.
I have another story. So, of course it involves my dad. If you're seeing a trend, it's because there is one. So we were driving around, uh, I think we were, like, looking through, like, creeks to, like, go fishing, like, finding, like, minnows and stuff to use as bait, and there was this trash bag, and it was really weird, in, like, the middle of nowhere by this creek, and, my dad's like, "Oh, what the fuck?" And he opened it up, and there was just bones in it, and he goes, "Oh, well, I don't think it's, like, a the femur is, like, too big or whatever." Um, he didn't call the police, so I hope it wasn't human bones, and I'm assuming it was just, like, some deer that someone was supposed to, like, not kill because it's not hunting season, and they're like, "I gotta get rid of these bones."
Hopefully, it was just some goth girl's, like, best time of the year
I
finding a whole bag of
know.
cleaned out bones.
I would've took those bones though, if it
I
were me.
wouldn't have touched the trash bag.
Well, cause there wasn't a head in it. So, like, usually they, like, use, like, the heads as, like, for mounting and stuff though.
Right.
So, it makes sense why there wasn't a head.
Why just dump the
But
trash
it would
bag? Why not
also
just dump out the
yeah.
bones? I don't know if it was true, but my dad and I used to walk our dogs, and we lived, in the country, and we were walking past this one place, those metal railings, whatever they're called,
The
so you
guardrails?
yeah, okay, so you don't fall in a ditch, there's a
Yeah.
guardrail, and it smelled rotting, and it was gross, and my dad told me later on that a guy had crashed his motorcycle there, and I don't know if he was, like, trying to be funny, but he said that we were smelling a rotting body because it took them a while to find the body.
What?
So I don't know if it's true because my dad also liked to scare me.
Mhm.
And he wasn't exactly the most honest person, but I think about it a lot when I go past the guardrail and I wonder if that was an actual person that we were smelling or a deer. I
It was
hope it was a
probably a
deer.
deer.
I hope it was a deer.
Okay, this one comes from Let's Not Meet. And it's titled, I Was on Someone's Kill List. After high school many years ago, I was in a bad place. My guardian had kicked me out after graduation. She didn't help me find a place to stay, so I lived in my car for a couple months. I met some heavy metal dudes at work one day. I had seen them around town, and all my other friends knew who they were. Everyone loved them. We became friends over a couple months, and they offered for me to move in with them. I agreed. Looking back now, I wish I had just stayed in my car. My two main roommates were brothers named Andrew and Seth. They were in a band. They also believed in the occult and anything of that sort. I have never really believed in that stuff, but I'm not one to tell someone what they should believe. They had let me live with them rent free for several months. So who was I to complain? Being the only female in a house full of young men, I was always looking over my shoulder. You never know who you can trust. Turns out I was right to worry. Over time, their friends started to stay with us for longer periods of time, sometimes weeks. Their friends were another group of brothers that they had gone to school with. There were five brothers in total, but only two stayed with us consistently. The younger brother, Mark, was very polite. He cleaned up after himself and always helped with the household chores. The other brother, Adam, had a laundry list of mental problems. He had apparently done some bad drugs back in the day, and it had developed into what seemed like psychosis of the religious sort. He had done time in prison for assaulting a woman with a Bible. He would often look you in the eyes and tell you he could see how you would die. Once he told me that I was possessed by a demon and I needed my soul cleansed. Everyone in the house knew he had these problems, but he was their friend. They had helped him through the hard times and gave him a place to stay. Otherwise, he would have been on the streets. I was always on guard around him after the things he had told me. No one else seemed to be as concerned as I was. They should have been. One day, I was sleeping and my phone rang. It was my boss. He asked if I could come into work an hour early. It was only 12 p.m., and I was broke and had nothing better to do, so I said yes. I got up, began getting ready to leave, and walked out into the living room to see Mark and Andrew sitting on the couch, while Adam sat on the floor by the TV. He was watching scripture videos on YouTube, some real end of days shit, but that was fairly common, so I went about my business and said goodbye and left for work. My shift at work was almost complete when the phone rang. My boss answered. and handed the phone to me and said, "For you." I was just a cashier, so I assumed it was a friend that couldn't reach me on my phone. I answered the phone and heard a man's voice that I didn't recognize. "Hi, this is Detective Williams. Something happened at your apartment today, and we need you to come to the station to talk about it." I left work immediately. I had assumed one of the brothers had been arrested for drug dealing or something. I was very wrong. I got to the station and was buzzed in. An officer escorted me to a small cold room with a camera. He gave me a bottle of water and left me by myself for about 30 minutes. My mind was racing, thinking about what could have happened. He came back in and informed me that Adam had stabbed and killed Andrew around 1 p.m. I was shocked. I had just left the house an hour before it had happened, and everything seemed fine. I asked if there had been a fight. The detective informed me that there hadn't been a fight and it seemed to have happened out of nowhere. I gave my statement to the police and left. Nowhere to go, still in shock and confused, out of my mind. Our apartment was a crime scene, so I had went to another friend's house to watch the news report, since the police wouldn't give me any information on the case. Imagine just being left at a fucking interrogation room for 30 minutes by yourself, not knowing what the fuck happened.
I know it makes sense if she was like a suspect and they're
Yeah,
like trying to like stress her out, but like, why
yeah.
would you? She had like, why would you do that to her?
Over the next couple of days, the information began to be released. Adam hadn't just stabbed Andrew once, not twice, but he had stabbed him over and over and nearly decapitated him. After the murder, he ran down the road still holding the murder weapon. He called 911 to inform him what he had done. I watched the news report in horror. We had known he was unstable, but this, he had fully confessed to the brutal murder and provided police with his notebooks. He had apparently been planning to murder all of his brothers, my roommates, and me. He thought we were all possessed by demons, and this was the only way to free us. Luckily, none of his other intended victims were there that day. Mark unfortunately witnessed the murder, but he luckily escaped. If I hadn't gotten that call from my boss, I would not be alive today. So, to that man who brutally murdered my friend and wanted to murder me, let's never meet again.
Jesus.
Yeah, they have an update.
Ooh,
Apparently, they're doing well now, and they say it has taken them a long time to come to terms with what had happened, and they're grateful for all the the well wishes and stuff that everyone's sending them.
no update on the killer or how anyone else is
No,
doing.
but they did send the mods, news articles, to prove that their story is true.
Oh, that's cool.
But I would understand them, not wanting to publicly share the news articles though, because
With their names and
doxing,
everything.
yeah. And they changed I think they did change the names, so for, privacy reasons, but oh my god.
This isn't one of my stories, but I was just watching a podcast last night. Um and the one was telling a story about how it started as a Reddit story on Am I the Asshole?
Mhm.
And the New York Times found it and like posted an article about it that this guy had a roommate and his roommate was kind of weird and one day asked if he like ever experimented with men or something like that and the guy's like no. Anyways, he was in bed one night and heard rustling under his bed and when he went to look, his roommate was under his bed and apparently he'd been sleeping under his bed for like a while so that way they would be close.
I have goosebumps. It's so creepy.
It's
Oh
creepy.
my god.
Yes. I did not know. Oh. Oh god. Imagine actually looking under your bed, like thinking you're crazy, like, oh no, there's not gonna be anything under there, but let's see what it is. And then like seeing
A person, your
yes.
roommate. Oh
And
my
a
god.
grown man at that, because he was like a whole man, and like that'd be terrifying. This one story is also from our paranormal. It's titled Our Bizarre Experiences with the Forest Behind Our House Eventually Forced Us to Move Out. I was 8 years old when we first moved into the house on the edge of the forest. My parents had their doubts about buying a house with a backyard bordered by forest. They had concern about wild animals getting into our bins or hurting our dogs, and they were worried about one of us going like too far into the trees and getting lost. But it was cheap. My dad liked the seclusion. My mom loved the house itself, and my siblings and I were excited about playing in the backyard and exploring the forest. Our first sign that something wasn't right was that our dogs were absolutely terrified of the forest. They never went into the forest for any reason. If a toy they had been playing with found its way past the tree line, they would refuse to retrieve it, and when one of us went into the woods, they would pace anxiously until we returned. On occasion, we'd notice the dogs staring at a spot in the forest in obvious distress, sometimes growling or barking, but we could never see anything there. My brother once carried one of the dogs into the trees to show her there was nothing scary about it, but she wiggled out of his grip and sprinted into the house in a panic. If we were in the backyard when it was getting dark, we sometimes heard noises like someone was walking through the forest, sticks crunching underfoot, branches being pushed aside. If we called out, there was no response, but if we shined a flashlight around, we would occasionally catch a glimpse for just a split second of something that we could swear looked like a person walking around in the dark. My parents quickly banned us from entering the forest at all after dark, and even during the day, we weren't allowed to go out of sight of the house. My sister's bedroom window looked out at the backyard and the forest beyond, and she remembers looking out her window one night and seeing a shadowy figure standing right at the edge of the backyard. She says there was something wrong with it, like it wasn't quite standing on the ground and it was a little too tall to be a person and it was sort of disordered. And she was convinced it was staring at her. She called out for our dad, saying there was a man in the yard staring at her through her window. And when he ran outside to chase off whoever it was, she continued to watch the figure. It didn't move away, but when the light from our dad's flashlight passed over it, it suddenly just wasn't there anymore. We regularly heard knocking at the back door at night with no one there. Our parents thought it was teenagers playing pranks and stopped bothering even opening the door until one rainy night when the knocking was persistent and agitated. My mom pointed out that there might be someone needing shelter from the heavy rain outside, but when she opened the door, not only was there no one there, but there were no wet footprints on the porch. The knocking continued the whole time we lived there, and it would happen several times in a span of a few weeks, and then stop for months, and then start up again. My parents eventually installed a security camera, and there was never anyone at the door. The camera wasn't all useless, though. About 3 years into living there, my brother started having night terrors and sleepwalking. When he went sleepwalking, he would always go out the back door and start walking toward the forest. My mom, being a light sleeper, would hear the door open and run out to get him before he made it into the forest. After the third or fourth time it happened, my brother asked to see the camera footage because he wanted to see how he looked when he was sleepwalking, I guess thinking it looked funny. The footage showed him walking out onto the porch, then pausing as if listening to something and shaking his head, then reluctantly walking forward as if being pulled or forcibly guided by something. One evening, my dad was in the backyard and he heard my sister calling him from the forest, seemingly in distress. Thinking she'd gone exploring from the forest, and fallen over and hurt herself, he ran in and started calling out to her, but quickly realized it was too dark to see her and he couldn't pinpoint where her voice was coming from. He told her to wait where she was while he grabbed a flashlight. When he ran back in the house for the flashlight, he saw my sister inside, safe and completely unconcerned. At the time, my dad hadn't told us about hearing my sister's voice in the forest, so when I heard my mom's voice coming from the forest months later while I was outside with the dogs one evening, I didn't question it despite the fact that I'd seen my mom inside recently and hadn't noticed her walk past me. My mom was calling to me, saying she'd gotten her sweater caught in some branches and needed me to come in and help her. As I walked in, the dog started barking, alerting my dad, who saw me through the window wandering into the forest. He came outside and called to me, and I said I was just helping mom. He yelled back that mom was inside and I needed to run back to the house as fast as I could, which I did. After this, my parents had a fence built up around the backyard and started looking for a new place. In the meantime, the fence being built and us moving out, it got way worse. We'd hear knocking at the door more regularly, as well as tapping on the windows as if someone was walking the perimeter of the house and trying every window. We would often hear scratching and scraping sounds on the fence and voices beyond it. My brother's night terrors got more frequent, and one night my mom didn't hear the door open when he went sleepwalking, and he woke up standing at the fence, staring into the forest with the dogs barking at him. The last morning we spent there, less than 4 years after we moved in, we woke up to find the back door fully open, and the security camera footage showed it slowly swing open on its own. Since moving out, my brother's sleepwalking has stopped, though he still gets night terrors and he suffers from pretty severe anxiety. A few nights ago, he called me out of the blue, and after a bit of small talk, he asked me if I think the door being open that night means that whatever was there had finally gotten in. He was trying to make light of it, saying how he was getting into the spirit of Halloween, joking about how maybe we should all just get exercised just in case something latched onto us all those years ago. But I think he's deeply still bothered by everything that happened. I know I still am a little. I still get nervous around dark wooded areas. I don't know what was out there in the forest behind our house at night, but I get the feeling given the chance, it would have swallowed us whole. I got goosebumps when I read it. I don't like that one. I got goosebumps when it was talking about the brother being out at the fence, and then when
Mhm.
the dad was like told her to run, and or them. I don't know if it's a male or a female, but anyways, that's a big nope.
Yeah. And there's, like, mimics, like, in the woods and stuff, especially in, like, Appalachia.
I know. I don't even like that word. It
Ah,
scares me.
makes me feel icky.
Mhm.
Okay. This one is called, Church in the Woods from the Backwoods Creepy subreddit. Longtime lurker on here using a throwaway. I've recently found myself snowed in and bored, so I figured I'd finally share my own story. This really happened, and this is how it went down. No bullshit. This isn't fiction, and I'll warn you, it's long. I grew up in Ohio in the
Oh,
70s. What?
that's the first problem.
Yeah.
Ohio's stupid.
Dude, for real. Me and my childhood friend Joe were outside all the time. Honestly, only thing to do really is being outside. There's plenty of cornfields to explore. Um, Joe lived on a farm that bordered a pretty big forest, and my parents would drop me off in the morning and we'd stay in the woods all weekend. We'd come out only for school. We loved pretending we were frontiersmen. We'd build shelters, traps, practice making fire with sticks, the whole 9 yards. When we got to be in high school, we got this notion to pull a Stand By Me. This was based on the movie of the same name that had just come out. The idea was that we'd walk the railroad tracks out in the country, but instead of looking for a dead body, we'd find cool bridges to fish from and camp a little ways off the tracks. Of course, we knew this was dangerous and we'd likely be trespassing, but we were kids. Had a lot of fun. We did find beautiful rivers. We discovered bridges no one went to. We fished. We hid from trains. At night, we camped in the woods just near the tracks and made some small hidden fires. Nothing bad ever happened. It was idyllic. In fact, it was so fun we did it multiple times. Never had a problem. After high school, me and Joe went on our own ways. We both left home, but we always stayed in touch and we always tried to coordinate visits so we'd see each other occasionally. Well, one summer in the mid 90s, it worked out so that we were both in town for about a week. We'd do stuff with the family in the day, and at night, we'd either catch drinks at the bar or sit outside Joe's house around a fire and talk about the old days. One night, me and Joe got to talking about our Stand By Me trips. Well, nostalgia and beer are a hell of a mix. Soon we decided to take a day, walk the rails, camp one night, and then walk home. The day came. We started out early in the morning. We had my wife drop us off in our old spot where we used to start, right outside our hometown. She thought this was absolutely crazy and made sure to mention it. Definitely a wife thing to do.
I was thinking the same thing.
When we pulled away, Joe suggested that instead of walking the usual route, we'd take the opposite direction, just to be adventurous. We knew the land well, we had a map, and so I gave it a what the hell, and off we set. The day went fine, it was fun, and a little sad, but in a good way. We found a bridge and sat on the edge, smoked a joint, and moved on. We had no fishing gear, but we brought some canned food and other stuff. Before night started to set in, we picked a spot to camp. It was a thick forested area, trees on every side of the train tracks, so you felt like you were in a tunnel. We had brought small hammocks to sleep on, but before we could set them up, we decided to do a little scouting of the perimeter. Now, this is what we used to do in the old days too. We'd walk the area and make sure some dude's house wasn't just over the hill and we weren't actually camping in their yard. We walked maybe 100 or so feet into the woods, set up a small incline. We figured if we didn't see anything from the top of this short hill, we'd be fine. But when we got to the top, we saw an old building down at the bottom about 100 yards into the woods. It was barely visible. We pondered over what to do. We both assumed it was a sugar shack or something. There didn't appear to be a clear road to it. From where we were, there didn't look to be anyone in it either. All was quiet, no movement could be seen, no lights. We decided to walk a little closer just to make sure. We came down the hill very slowly, and as we neared the building, we saw it wasn't a sugar shack at all. It was an old church. It looked like it had been abandoned for years. It was a squat, sagging building whose wooden planks were almost black from years of moss and rot. A cross still stood on top of the place, also weathered black. None of the windows had glass, and there were no doors, just open doorways. We got close enough to see inside. There were rows of pews and a built up section in front for a preacher to stand. We didn't go all the way in. We didn't want to. Beyond all that, there was no sign of anyone else. No footprints, no paths, no roads. It was an abandoned church. We left immediately and went back up the hill to our spot we had picked to camp. Having a hill between us and the church made us feel better, but we were a little uneasy. We chalked it up to the natural creepiness of seeing a church in the middle of the woods, obviously. Besides, at this point, it was dusk, and we decided to rig up our hammocks and go to sleep and move on at early morning. Night set in, and we laid in our hammocks and shot the shit. We began to hear something in the direction of the church. Our conversation about it went a little like this. Do you hear that? What the fuck is that? It sounds like people singing. And it did sound just like singing. We both slid right out of our hammocks and hunkered down, straining to hear more. We listened for a minute or two, and the singing continued, but it wasn't getting louder. Finally, we decided to creep back up the hill to see if we could spy where the sound was coming from. We could still move very quietly in the woods from the old days, and it was second nature to us. The moon was barely out, but it was providing us enough light so we could see and wouldn't walk right into a tree. But it was near pitch black. We didn't use flashlights as we crept slowly up the hill, and we didn't talk. When we got to the top, we saw a light in the distance, and it was coming from the church. The singing was coming from inside. Joe and I put our heads close together and had a hushed conversation that boiled down to, "Can you believe this shit?" The light looked to be candlelit from the way it flickered, and though we tried, we couldn't make out what was being sung. It sounded like church music, but in another language. We sat and watched for a while, trying to see who was in there, but we only saw occasional shadows. We had no intention of getting close either. We had about a football field length between us, and we aimed to keep it that way. The singing continued for a bit, and then it stopped. After that, a booming male voice began to chant. I already was freaked out, but this voice thoroughly scared the shit out of me. It sounded like some Old Testament preacher you would see in the movies. But again, it was like he was speaking in a different language because we couldn't understand a single word. Eventually, it got to where the single male voice would say something and then a bunch of voices would answer in song. This lasted for a while and then they all broke into this long, sustained wail that just kept getting louder. It got so loud and so disturbing that I covered my ears and then it stopped. At this point, I was just getting ready to say, "Let's get the fuck out of here," when Joe put a hand on my shoulder and hissed, "They're coming out." We were far enough away that we couldn't make them out really well, but what we could see was a line of figures walk out of the open doorway, all holding hands in single file. We could see some of them had flashlights. They began to sing again, and the light from the flashlights began to move toward us and the hill. We booked it
Mm-mm.
back down to our campsite, grabbed our shit, ran to the tracks. Once there, we ran down the tracks in the direction we had come from. After a few minutes, we stopped and looked back. We saw lights coming down the hill. They were moving erratically, like whoever was holding them was shaking them. We continued to run in spurts and walk as fast as we could. We eventually stopped seeing the lights and came to a road. By our map, we knew a small town was about 15 minutes down it, and we walked there. Got a 24-hour gas station to call my wife from to come get us. My wife and other friends all just thought it was kids messing around, but I heard those voices and they sure as hell didn't sound like kids to me. Not sure who those people were, but it was definitely the creepiest thing that had happened to me out in the woods.
That's creepy as shit.
That is so creepy.
I'm so glad I have Paul.
I know.
Like there's a few times like my heart rate was like increasing and I was like, kitty, kitty,
I'm
kitty,
sweating.
I do not like that at all. And like with them going up the hill, it made it like my thought would have been like, oh my God, they're coming for us.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too. I was like, "Oh my god."
Also, why are churches so creepy for a place that's supposed to be holy and safe?
Mhm.
Why are they so creepy?
Yeah.
So this is also on our paranormal. The title is I tried to recreate an entity I saw back in the summer of 2011. So this happened back in August of 2011, in the greater Los Angeles area. During my first year of high school, I was going through some rough times. I was extremely hostile and rebellious, and I greatly worried my parents. There were a few instances where they almost wanted to call the police on me due to my impulse and negative behavior. Here's the story. I just ended my first year of high school. I used to sleep with the door open back in the day until this happened. I randomly woke up one morning around 1:30 a.m. I stayed awake, looking at the ceiling, wondering if I should go back to sleep or play some video games. While I was deciding what to do, I heard faint footsteps. At first, I was thinking it was just in my head or it was the sound of creaking wood. I heard the footsteps again, but this time they grew louder and sounded like someone was walking straight up to my room. But again, I played it off as creaking wood. After a little while, I noticed something in my peripheral vision. I could see a shadow or an object standing at my doorway. I knew something was right there because I could not directly see my brother's room a few feet from mine. Something was blocking my entrance. I glanced and saw that the shadow looked humanoid or in the form of a person. I assumed it was maybe my parents checking in on us like they used to do back then. Minutes passed and I saw that the shadow would not move or go away. I got curious to see who was blocking my doorway, and slowly, the shadow started coming into light. It was an extremely tall and abnormally thin humanoid, about 7 to 8 feet tall. It was faceless, hairless, bald, and had a fair skin complexion with visible veins under its faceless skin. The entity was dressed in old fashioned clothes like a grandpa would dress. It had a cream colored sweater with what appeared to be random paint strokes and splashes on it of many colors, and black slacks. It was just standing there as if it was looking at me. I thought I was dreaming. I started blinking, shaking my head, and even slapped myself in hopes that when I would open my eyes each time, it would disappear and I could dismiss this as a nightmare or a possible hallucination. After my final attempt to wake up, I stopped and looked across. It was still standing there. I leaned up from my bed to get a closer look at the entity and saw it had freakishly long arms, way past the knee, and fell onto the floor. That was when I immediately freaked out and pulled the covers over my face. I tried yelling for help, and I couldn't scream at all from the terror. About 30 minutes later, I built up some courage and pulled the covers off, and to my surprise, it was gone. After the encounter, I ran to my parents' room to tell them what I had seen earlier. Later, after sunrise during breakfast, I was about to tell my mother about a crazy dream I had. Still, she had immediately interrupted me, saying that I had gone into her room very early in the morning, petrified, frightened, and talking about a tall man I had seen. That was when I realized that I was not dreaming at all, that event happened. Strangely enough, after encountering the entity, my mother said that I had changed drastically for the better. I haven't seen it since, but a few years later, my youngest brother also saw the same entity kneeling before him, wearing an old-fashioned suit, staring him down.
How cool to be visited by Slender Man in your own home.
I don't think that cool, honestly, because I think Slenderman eats you.
No, he
Just does things to you with his tentacles.
yeah, but he like has children that he takes care of supposedly in the woods, right?
I don't know, but I was
But you can't
massively
look at
afraid
him.
of Slenderman. I literally used to not be able to sleep because I was so scared of Slenderman as like a 17-year-old. I couldn't sleep until a friend at school showed me a video of a guy dressed up as Slenderman dancing to Gangnam Style, and I finally like
I
that.
love that kind of internet.
It finally cured my fear, and thankfully now I'm 28, so I don't think Slenderman cares about me because I'm
No,
not a kid
definitely not.
anymore.
This one is from Backwoods Creepy again, called My Experience in the Woods.
I see there's a trend today.
I'm fairly new to Reddit, so only discovered this sub recently. Using a throwaway account here because I didn't feel comfortable enough sharing this on my main account. I've lurked for a little while and I think it's the perfect place to share the story of an experience I had about 9 to 10 years ago. The reason I'm sharing this is A, because that's the point of the sub, and I've enjoyed reading everyone else's experiences, and B, to see if anyone has a similar experience or idea of what this could have been because I never have. Before I start, I've told this story to lots of people over the years friends, family, even acquaintances whenever supernatural slash scary stuff has come up in conversation. But I've always left out the finer details on purpose because honestly, I think I have some latent trauma from it because I don't like going into detail or reliving this experience. Instead, I have only ever recounted this as a 60-second scary story to elicit a reaction, probably as a coping mechanism. My girlfriend is the only person I have told the full story. To be clear, I'm not trying to convince anyone of anything here. You can believe what you want, and I respect your opinion. But I'm also not going to debate or argue over something I know to be true. This experience happened when I was wild camping on my own in a forest in Wales. I live in England near the Welsh border. Don't know where that is because Americans are terrible at geography.
I know what Wales is,
Mhm.
and
I do
I
too.
there's a lot of spooky things there, I think.
Really?
Like, I think of it as spooky because, like, I used to listen to this podcast, and, like, it took place in England, and he always told scary stories of, like, listener submissions, and I swear, like, all of them came from Wales.
Here are the things I know about England. London, Wales, Princess Diana, the Queen is dead, King Charles.
As a cheater,
That's it. That's all I know. Oh, and
and
Liverpool.
that England absolutely wrecked the world. Like,
Yeah.
like, it's funny that they they tried taking over, like, the whole like, just everything, and then they're now stuck with this tiny little continent. Like, this island,
Yes.
like the state of Indiana.
I know, like, people from the UK are, like, always, like, mind boggled about, like, how big the United States is because you can literally walk in England for, like, 5 minutes and be in a different, like
Yeah.
a different, like, city or whatever, and here, our country is so big, we have to, like, take flights to, like, go visit another state. Back to the story. This is something I've done several times and continue to do to this day. I think it was April or May of 2013 or 14. Weather was unseasonably good, and this was the second of 3 nights that I had been planning for my trip, although it ended up being the last. First night and second day had been great. Got a lovely long hike and followed by a pub lunch. What kind of camping are you doing if you're going to the pub? That's not what camping's about. You're
Well,
supposed to
didn't they say that they were what did they call the camping?
wild camping.
That's I mean, you can't put wild camping and pub in the same sentence.
What if it's a pub and it's only ran by squirrels and deer?
That would be pretty wild.
That would be pretty wild. Oh, honestly, I'd kind of love that. Getting served by a squirrel. Actually, I wouldn't trust that at all.
No. No, they're kind of gross if you think about it.
Nah, yeah, and they're like always digging. I'll take it back.
You
You're not supposed to go to pubs. You're supposed to hunt for your own food when you're camping.
wild camping anyway.
I'd driven back to the area I was staying in. Why are you driving places? You're camping. I'd driven back to the area I was staying, and I was now back at my tent. I settled down for the night, read a book, and had some beers, and went to sleep. It was probably between 11 p.m. and midnight. I was just in that state where you're semi conscious, about to drift off, but haven't quite just yet. I slowly became aware of a melodic noise somewhere outside the tent. Didn't sound that close, but maybe within like 50 feet. It sounded like a person perfectly humming a tune. After listening for a couple minutes, it was definitely someone humming a tune. When I say perfectly, I mean just that. It sounded like a professional singer or something because it was perfectly in tune, no voice breaks or falters at all. I can't remember whether it sounded like a man or woman. At this point, I'm shitting myself because it's just incredibly creepy. Something like from a horror movie. I hadn't left my tent at this point, and the humming hadn't gotten any louder. It just stayed a distant background noise. I didn't know what to do, but knew I couldn't just stay there forever. So I mustered up the courage to open my tent as slowly and quietly as I could to see if I could see anything or tell where the noise was coming from.
I know in Appalachia,
Mhm.
if the noise seems far away, that means that the creature is close. And if the noise is close to you, that means the creature is far away.
If I'm hearing noises, I'm staying in my tent and pretending I'm asleep.
I'm calling somebody to pick me up.
I'm not making any noises. I am not even calling
I'm
anyone.
texting.
But within 5 seconds of me poking my head out of the tent, the humming stopped. It didn't fade away or anything. It just stopped dead as if someone had pressed pause on a recording. I'm still very on edge at this point, but at the time, I assume that's just what it is. Someone playing a prank on fellow campers with an audio recording. I literally couldn't think of any other explanation. Based on that assumption, I shouted something like, "You're not funny, fuck off." That made me feel a bit better because I felt like I'd addressed the issue. I don't know, but for whatever reason, it seemed to help my nerves a bit at the time. I let that hang in the air for about 10 seconds while my head is still poking out of the tent and it stays quiet. I'm kind of satisfied at this point, so I begin to move back in. As I'm reaching for the tent zipper, though, the humming starts again, the same tune, but much louder, much closer, and from the completely opposite direction. My heart completely sinks because there is no way someone could have moved from the first source of the noise to the second without me seeing or hearing something. Literally impossible. It was perfectly quiet in the woods, not even any breeze against the leaves. And yeah, it was dark, but I could still see a short distance thanks to the moonlight. In the back of my mind, though, my subconscious is clearly working overtime, trying to rationalize this, and I guess I must have assumed that there were multiple pranksters out there with multiple audio recordings. I can't remember exactly what my thought process was at that point because it's truthfully all a blur. But for one reason or another, I stormed angrily out of the tent towards the now quite loud sound. It sounded as if the person was humming within like 10 feet of the tent.
Mm-mm.
I got out of the tent, turned towards the noise, ready to scream at the perpetrator or even attack if necessary. That's when I see this humanoid figure silhouetted against the tree line, maybe 15 feet away from me. My best description of it is this: it was large, thin, and it was shaped like a human, but way too tall and proportioned all wrong. It was huge. I would guess over 7 feet. Its limbs were unnaturally long, like it had been stretched out in all directions. Its head appeared very small and rounded. I think the figure was gray in color, but I can't be 100% sure because of the poor visibility. I couldn't make out much of its face at all. It just seemed to be shrouded in shadow. I definitely didn't notice any features like eyes, mouth, or nose. It was standing quite still, facing directly towards me. I say quite still because there was some movement in the same way that a person or animal would sway back and forth or make some minor body movements, etc. This was a real living thing. I know that for a fact, not an illusion, not a prop or prank. This thing was standing right in front of me and aware of my presence. I'm literally paralyzed by fear at this point. I have never felt anything like it before or since. Just a primal terror, which has left me cold, shaking, just standing there, quite literally unable to move. I distinctly remember thinking that I need to get away, but I could not physically move my body. It was the most terrified I have ever been. As I first laid eyes on this creature, the humming stopped and immediately it started humming again, but not a song. It started softly singing my name in what sounded like my voice. That sounds fucking ridiculous, I know, but I swear that's how I remember it. Even though it was singing in my voice, though, it didn't sound right. The syllables were just off, as though a non human had heard speech once and was trying to mimic it for the first time poorly. I haven't described that well, but I don't think I know the words to do so. This can't have gone on for more than about 10 seconds, but it felt like forever. Me standing there, this creature standing motionless and singing my name. At some point, though, every cell in my body just switched and I managed to turn and run as fast as I ever have in the opposite direction. For maybe 2 minutes, I was literally sprinting through the woods in just my socks and PJs, with absolutely no other thought in my mind other than putting distance between myself and that thing.
Jesus, Paul, come on.
I had no idea which direction I was going or how I'd make it back to my tent. When I eventually stopped, I just leaned against this tree, panting for ages. The forest was still, completely silent. I must have stayed by that tree for about 2 hours, waiting for my heart rate to settle, trying to calm down and decide what to do. I didn't want to go back to my tent. I was quite happy to leave all my stuff there, but I needed my phone and car keys to get home. I was several miles away from anywhere. I eventually made my way back slowly. It wasn't too hard to navigate back to my tent in those woods because the tree distribution wasn't very dense. I also hadn't gone as far as I first feared. Once back at my tent, I grabbed just my phone and keys and went back to the car as fast as I was comfortable. Spent the rest of the night sitting in the back seat on my phone, shaking, didn't even try to get any sleep. Once the sun was up, I managed to go back and pack my stuff up. and left as quickly as I could. After that, I took a 2+ year break from solo camping, something I would normally do every 3 to 4 months. So that's my experience. Make of it what you will. That has stayed with me ever since, and I know it always will. I don't know what was in the woods with me that night, but it scarred me and transformed the way I think about supernatural experiences. If anyone has encountered anything similar to what I described, I'd be interested to hear. Thanks for reading this, and sorry this was so long. Someone commented saying that it sounds like a crawler. They're known to mimic people, whistle, hum, and they also have very long limbs, distorted bodies, thin, and are usually a pale gray/white.
I don't like the name of that. Okay. So my last story is the subreddit r scary stories. So it's titled "The Night Clerk Isn't Here, so I'm filling in for his shift." I was never supposed to work the night shift. I had always been the daytime receptionist at the Silent Oaks Motel, a rundown roadside stop barely managing to stay in business. My shift was simple: check ins, check outs, and handling the occasional lost key. At 10 p.m., I was supposed to clock out, go home, and forget this place until morning. That was the routine. That was how it was meant to be. But that night, something changed. The old manager called me into his office just as I was gathering my things. He didn't look at me right away, just fumbled with a set of keys on his desk. His fingers trembled slightly as he pushed them towards me. "You're staying tonight," he muttered, his voice oddly flat. I frowned. Why? Pete finally met my eyes, but there was something off about his expression, something vacant, like he was staring through me rather than at me. "The night guy didn't show up. You're the only one who can do it." His tone was firm but distant, like he wasn't really there. I opened my mouth to protest, but the words never came. Pete's stare was unsettling. There was no frustration, no annoyance, just a blank sort of expression, like he already knew I wouldn't argue. It sent a chill through me. I hesitated. The motel felt different at night, heavier, quieter in a way that didn't feel peaceful. I could already feel that silence creeping in, but what choice did I have? Before I could think of a way out, Pete grabbed his coat and walked out the door. Just like that, I was alone. By 10:45 p.m., I was sitting at the front desk, staring at the outdated lobby decor. The motel felt different. The same cracked tiles, the same faded wallpaper peeling at the edges, but now everything seemed more alive in the worst way. The walls cracked, not randomly, but in a slow, rhythmic pattern, like the building itself was breathing. The fluorescent lights above me buzzed with a dull electric hum, flickering just enough to set my nerves on edge. I leaned back in the chair, exhaling slowly. It was just another shift. Just a few more hours and I'd be out of here. I had to kill some time somehow. The old wooden desk had a few drawers, so I started pulling them open one by one, sifting through the clutter. The first drawer held nothing but crumpled receipts and an old motel guest book covered in coffee stains. The second had a stapler and a few loose papers. Then I reached the bottom drawer. It was already open, just a crack. I frowned. I didn't remember seeing it opened earlier. Slowly, I pulled it out all the way. Inside, there was only one thing: a tape recorder. It was old, one of those bulky plastic case models from decades ago. Its once white surface now yellowed with age. A cassette was already inside. The label was faded, the ink smudged, but I could still make out the words written in shaky, uneven handwriting: "Do not erase." A strange feeling crept up my spine, cold and unwelcome. I wasn't sure why, but I suddenly didn't want to touch it. The drawer had been slightly opened, like someone had left it that way on purpose, like they wanted me to find it. I sat there for a long moment just staring at it. Then, against my better judgment, I reached out. My fingers barely brushed the plastic when a gust of cold air rushed past me. I jerked back. The motel door was still shut, the windows were closed, there was no draft. I swallowed hard, my heart thudded painfully against my ribs, but my curiosity was stronger than my fear. Slowly, I pressed play. The tape whirled, the static crackling through the speaker before a voice emerged, low, strained, exhausted. "If you're listening to this, that means you're on the night shift." The voice was male, tense, like he was holding back something worse than fear. "I don't know how much time I have left, but if someone else gets stuck here, maybe this will help." A pause. The silence between his words felt heavier than the static. "There are things in this motel at night, things that shouldn't be here." Another pause. The kind that makes you hold your breath.
I have goosebumps.
Good. "I don't know the rules. I had to learn the hard way." Then, three slow knocks were heard from the tape. The voice on the tape trembled. The first time I heard the knocking, I thought it was a guest. I gripped the desk. It was past midnight. I went to the door, my stomach clenched. A man was standing outside, pale, tall, wearing a suit. I felt a pulse in my throat. The voice continued. I asked if he needed a room. He didn't answer. I swallowed hard, my throat dry as if all the moisture had been sucked out of the air. A cold feeling crawled up my spine, making my skin prickle. Something about him felt off. Not just the silence, but the way he stood there, unmoving, like he was waiting for something. I should have shut the door. I should have walked away. The thought screamed in my head, a desperate warning, but my hands stayed frozen on the counter. My feet didn't move. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was fear. Either way, I didn't turn away. Instead, I met his eyes, dark, unreadable, like staring into an empty void. Something about them made my stomach tighten. Still, I forced my voice to stay steady. Do you need a room? I asked. He didn't respond, not with words. Instead of answering, he smiled. But when he smiled, it wasn't right. It was too wide, stretching unnaturally across his face. His teeth were too sharp, too white, almost glistening under the dim motel lights. It wasn't the kind of smile people gave you when they were happy. It was something else. Something is wrong. He stepped forward. I stepped back. He kept coming, his gaze locked onto mine. A slow, deliberate movement, like a predator sizing up its prey. I stepped back again, my hand brushing against the edge of the counter. He stepped in too close. Suddenly, he was inches from my face, so near I could see the fine cracks in his lips, smell the faint, metallic scent clinging to his breath. That grin never wavered. His teeth looked sharper now, as if they had grown in the space of a second. I didn't think, I just reacted. I slammed the door shut. My heart pounded as I locked it, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps. For a moment, there was nothing. Silence. Maybe it was over. Maybe he had walked away. Then, scratch. A slow, deliberate sound. Scratch. Like nails dragging against the wood. A whisper of noise, but somehow louder than anything else in the stillness of the night. That's when it hit me. If someone knocks after midnight, don't answer. That's rule number one. That's when I learned rule number one. I thought it was over. I sat behind the counter, heart still hammering, ears straining for any sound beyond the hum of the motel's old ceiling fan. The clock on the wall ticked away, each second stretching longer than the last. Then, at 1:33 a.m., the phone rang. The sudden noise nearly made me jump out of my skin. My pulse spiked. The motel phone rarely rang at this hour, and after what had just happened, I should have ignored it, but I didn't. I answered. That was my second mistake. The moment I lifted the receiver to my ear, I knew something was wrong. The voice on the other end, it sounded like my mother. My stomach dropped. My mother has been dead for 5 years. The voice was soft, distant, layered with static like an old warped cassette tape. Hello? I whispered, throat tightening. There was a pause, then she said my name again and again and again. Each time, the same tone, the same inflection. It wasn't a conversation. It wasn't even real. Like a recording stuck on the loop. I gripped the phone tighter, knuckles turning white. My breath came out shaky. Then the voice changed. It dropped lower, slower, and said, "Let me in." A chill ran through me so fast it felt like ice water had been poured down my spine. I hung up. My hands were shaking as I dropped the receiver back into the cradle. The phone rang again and again and again. Each time, the shrill electronic wail cut through the silence, clawing at my nerves. I didn't pick up. I didn't have to because now I understood. If the phone rings at 1 a.m., don't answer. That's rule number two. That's when I learned rule number two. The night dragged on, each second stretching into eternity. The silence pressed down on me like a weight, thick and suffocating. I sat frozen behind the desk, too scared to move, too afraid to even shift in my chair. Every sound, the distant hum of the vending machine, the creak of the old motel walls, felt magnified, unnatural. Then, it's 3 a.m. The TV flickered. The screen, dead and dark just a second ago, flashed to life with a burst of static. A crackling, broken hiss filled the air, making my skin crawl. I hadn't touched the remote. No one had. But the TV turned on by itself. My breath caught in my throat. The old motel television wasn't even modern. No automatic power on, no smart features. It should have stayed off, but it didn't. At first, I thought it was just static, the white noise swirling in random chaotic patterns. Then the image sharpened. It was the motel security footage. I frowned, my hands gripping on the edge of the desk. The cameras were meant to show the parking lot, the hallways, the back entrance, standard views for security. But something was wrong. The cameras, they weren't showing the parking lot. They weren't showing the hallways either. They were showing me, not me sitting at the desk, me standing outside, staring at the front door. A sick feeling spread through my chest. My body locked up. I stopped breathing. It was live footage. I was watching myself, but I was here. I was inside. I wasn't outside. The me on the screen was completely still, standing in the dim glow of the motel's neon sign. My head was tilted slightly downwards and my arms limp at my sides. But my face was nothing but a blur. And then the me on the screen started smiling. A slow, deliberate grin stretched across its face, too wide, too unnatural. Teeth glinted in the dim light. My stomach twisted, my pulse pounded in my ears. I wanted to look away, I needed to, but I couldn't. My eyes stayed locked on the screen, unable to tear away from the sight of myself, of something that looked like me, grinning like a hungry predator. That's when I learned rule number 3. If the TV turns on by itself, don't look at it. By the time 4 a.m. came, I was already a wreck. My hands were ice cold, my legs were numb from sitting in the same position for hours. My entire body ached with exhaustion, but I didn't dare close my eyes. The motel was silent again, but it wasn't the comforting kind of silence. It was the kind that just felt wrong, like something was waiting just out of sight, just beyond my reach. I thought maybe if I could make it to sunrise, this nightmare would end. But I wasn't prepared for what happened next. I heard my own voice calling from the hallway. A chill ran down my spine so fast it left me lightheaded. It was me, my voice, calling for help. Help me. A raw, desperate sob. Please. The sound of someone crying, my voice, my cries, echoed through the empty hall. It was weak, trembling, broken, begging. It sounded like I was dying. I clenched my fists so hard that my nails dug into my palms. My legs felt like they had turned to stone, refusing to move. I twisted to run, to find the source of the voice, to help, but I was sitting right here. I knew it wasn't real, but my voice kept crying out, and it lasted for minutes. Agonizing, torturous minutes of hearing myself sob and plead, growing more desperate with each passing second. Then the crying stopped. For a moment, there was nothing, a terrible, suffocating silence. Then, from outside the lobby, I heard the laughter. My own laughter. Low at first, then growing louder, amused, almost gleeful, and sent an icy wave of fear through me, worse than anything before. I was confused, terrified, unable to process what was actually happening. I sat there, my breath shallow, my heart hammering. Then I knew. This is rule number 4. No matter what you hear, do not leave the front desk after 4 a.m. By now, exhaustion had seeped into my bones. I needed to get out of there, but my shift dragged on, refusing to end. Every second felt like a lifetime. Then, at 4:45 a.m., I heard someone whisper my name. Soft, almost gentle. My entire body tensed. It wasn't the harsh static of the phone. It wasn't the distorted, unnatural tone from the TV. It wasn't even the eerie mimicry of my own voice. This was different. It sounded human, familiar even, and it came from room 209. A sharp chill ran through me. That room had been empty for years. I knew that. The motel records confirmed it. The manager had warned me on my first day this room hadn't been rented out since before my time. And yet the voice had come from there. I should have stayed put. I should have ignored it. But my feet were already moving. I stepped into the hallway. The corridor was dim, the overhead lights flickering faintly. The air felt heavier than before, thick with something I couldn't name. My heartbeat thundered in my ears as I moved closer, step by step until I saw it. The door to 209 was open, wide open. Darkness pooled inside like ink, swallowing every detail past the threshold. But then I saw someone standing in the corner, a shadowy figure completely still. It didn't move, didn't react to my presence. I swallowed, my breath unsteady. The rational part of my brain screamed at me to leave, to turn around, to run back to the front desk and never look back. But something made me stay. I forced myself to whisper, "Who's there?" For a second, silence. Then it whispered, "Come back. Come closer." The voice was soft, barely audible, like a breath carried on the wind. My breath caught, my chest tightened. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to run, so I did. I turned and sprinted down the hall, barely aware of my own panicked footsteps echoing against the walls. I didn't stop, I didn't look back, I didn't care who or what that was. I reached the front desk, grasping for air, my hands shaking violently. That's when I learned rule number 5. If you hear your name from room 209, don't respond. I don't know if I'll make it to sunrise, but I needed to say this before it's too late. There's a final rule, the most important one. If you're listening to this recording and you hear breathing behind you, don't turn around. The sound of ragged breath, not from the speaker but from somewhere else, right next to the microphone. Then a loud click, the tape ends. I sit there frozen. The recorder was still in my hand, but my fingers had gone numb. The room was silent. I didn't dare move. The words from the tape echoed in my mind, looping over and over like a warning I had no choice but to obey. My heart pounded so hard it hurt, but I forced myself to breathe as slowly as possible. Then, carefully, I reached for my bag. My hands were trembling as I stuffed the recorder inside. I didn't want to touch it anymore.
Why are you putting it in your bag? Don't take it home.
I didn't even want to look at it. I needed to leave now. I grabbed my keys off the counter, shoved the motel log into a drawer without caring if it made a sound, and turned toward the exit. I was done. I was never coming back here. But then I heard a ragged breath right behind me. Every muscle in my body locked up. My throat tightened. I squeezed my eyes shut. Don't turn around. The words from the recording burned into my brain like a brand. My hands clenched into fist. I wasn't breathing anymore. Then, click. The sound of the tape recorder. My stomach dropped. It had turned on by itself. I didn't move. I didn't reach for it. The static crackled, filling the empty space around me. Then the voice came through, but this time it wasn't his. It was mine. I don't know how it got there, but I didn't think much and I ran, and I never went back to the motel. And this only has 21 upvotes.
Oh my God. At one point, I had goosebumps on my scalp. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, you can find us on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and now Facebook at Paranoia Pair Pod. And we'll see you next Friday.
Thanks for listening. Stay spooky.
Bye.
Bye.